Welcome to Camp Maddie Behavior Edition. I'm Dr. Sheila Segerson, veterinary behaviorist and director of community solutions at Maddie's Fund. I'd like to welcome Bobbie Bhambree, director of education at Behavior Vets, and Ferdie Yau, director of shelter and community outreach at Behavior Vets. Bobbie started her career in 2003 working as a behavior counselor at the ASPCA Animal Behavior Center. Since then, she's focused on shelter dogs and privately owned pets, and is also a very successful agility competitor. Ferdie holds a master's in conservation biology from Columbia University. He trained animals at the Central Park and Bronx zoos before working with dogs in animal shelters. In his free time, Ferdie studies the lives of urban coyotes living in the New York City metropolitan area. I'm really excited about this topic, resilience conditioning for shelter dogs, building bounce back for life in the real world. After this presentation, we'll take your questions. I'm going to turn things over to you, Bobbie and Ferdie. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. So welcome. So why us? So Ferdie, here, stay on with me. Why us? So Ferdie and I have been working together. We've known each other for what, like 15 or 20 years in the field. And we started working together at Behavior Vets maybe about 4 years ago.
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah, I can't believe it. And yeah, it was 2020, right before the pandemic shut down. It was a crazy time. So trial by fire, our friendship just continued to grow, and our bond grew in all these ways that we were working on projects together. And I have been working with Dr. Kathy Murphy on a framework on resilience, and Ferdie has been working in shelters for a very long time. And so when this opportunity came up to talk about resilience in the shelter world, we just had to do this presentation together. I don't know if you want to jump in real quick, Ferdie.
Oh, thanks, Bobbie. Yes. So yeah, I think this is where we really love to give back to really help the shelter population. I know, like Bobbie and I, we both feel so passionate about this subject. And hopefully we will give you guys a different perspective on how to work with your shelter dogs here.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to dive into the presentation. The way that it's going to work is Ferdie and I are just going to go back and forth on the slides, jumping in here and there. Ferdie, if I miss something, feel free to pop in, and we'll look at things together. So let's talk quickly about the industry today. It's so much more than obedience training, right? In the shelter world, we're really looking at welfare, emotional welfare, physical well-being, mental well-being. Behavior is rich and complex. We're moving away from compliance and towards cooperation and compassion. And we're really looking at well-being as part of the conversation, whether you're looking at a shelter dog or you're working with a pet home or recently adopted dog, working through rescues, fosters. We're supporting the well-being of the animal versus teaching skills. So if you want to learn more about the framework itself, the resilience framework, Dr. Murphy and I wrote an article for the IAABC Foundation Journal. I'm going to leave this on for a moment. Feel free to scan the QR code. You'll get direct access to the article. We're not going to go into the detail of the article, the research that supported this, why we wrote what we wrote, how we wrote what we wrote. That's all in the article, the citations and everything. But what Ferdie and I are going to do today is take the framework and apply it in a practical way to work to shelter dogs, and looking specifically at a couple of different cases in this presentation after I talk a little bit about what the framework is. All right, just give you another moment to scan away. All right. So is resilience multidisciplinary? Yes, it absolutely is. So we're looking at first psychology, resilience in the conversation of resilience, resistance to behavioral problems, coping with adversity. When you're looking at the discipline of sociology, resistant to social pressures, having social flexibility. Social flexibility is really challenging in the shelter environment. We're also looking at the discipline of neuroscience, resistance to stress, the effect of biological responses. And then finally, we're looking at medicine, resistance to disease, longevity of life. So what is resilience exactly? It's the ability to adapt successfully or recover quickly from stressful events and conditions and situations. We're also looking at the ability to resist the impacts of those stressful events over time. Stress happens, life happens. How does it impact your body? How does it impact your mind, emotional state over time? It also depends on the stressor. It also is dynamic. There are going to be periods of your life, and this is for humans, not just animals, where you may be more resilient for a number of reasons, or you may be less resilient for a number of reasons. I know when I was on tour in December giving the talk on the resilience framework, I got really sick right before our tour started, and we were on the road for 2 weeks. And then I got really sick afterwards because I basically willed myself through the tour, but I had low resilience, which is why I got sick. So the presentation today is going to focus mostly on the practical part of the work that we're doing, because I imagine most of you guys are like in the trenches, working in the shelters, staff volunteer, maybe trainers that are independent contracts for shelters. Like, you need practical skills, but I want to touch upon the biology and the neuroscience just a little bit to give you a bit of a foundation to see where we're going. So when you're thinking about resilience, it relies on effective biological responses to environmental change, and those are active mechanisms. We're also looking at the resistance to the negative impacts of stress, and those are passive mechanisms. This is all in the biology, and the incredible thing about this is that you can change it. And I know I can just speak anecdotally. The way that I'm able to manage stress today versus the way I was in my late 20s, early 30s is massively better. And it's not just from age and wisdom and life experience. It's also because as I've learned about resilience and done the research with Dr. Murphy, I have actually applied it to my own life, not just my dog's. So quickly, let's talk about stress before we dive into the actual practical part of it. This is the specific biological system that I want to talk about, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. HPA axis is how we're going to refer to it. So can you see the mouse, Ferdie? Okay, cool. So here's the hypothalamus in the brain. I mean, and it's obviously not like this direct path like this. It's a bit more involved with the rest of the body, but we just want to give you a snapshot. Here's the pituitary glands, and then here are the adrenal glands. And the glands are all talking to each other, and the brain, they're all talking to each other when it comes to stress. It's a complex system of neuroendocrine pathways and feedback loops that help the body manage stress. It consists of a cascade of these pathways that respond to whatever's going on in the environment, however the brain perceives what's happening in the environment. Stress, particularly short-term stress, can have several benefits. It can enhance our mental acuity. It helps us think more clearly, focus better. It can be really particularly useful when giving a presentation like right now, or facing a challenging task, like getting ready to take a test. Additionally, the right amount of stress can serve as stimulation, preventing boredom, keeping us engaged and alert. I also compete in dog sports. So I have a certain amount of stress that I'm experiencing as I'm getting ready to like enter the ring to compete in agility with my dog. And that helps me get in the zone so I can be really present and focus on what I need to do to communicate to the dog versus hearing and thinking about all the things that are happening around me when I'm at a competition. My brain prioritizes what it needs to do and prepare my body for what it needs to do and kind of tune out everything else. However, it's important to note that these benefits primarily apply to short-term stress. That's what we want to see. Chronic or long-term stress, which is what shelter living can be, especially for dogs that are there for a while, can have detrimental effects on health and well-being. Oh, and I want to say excitement is a form of stress because that comes back to preparing the body and brain for the task at hand. Like I said, when I enter a competition ring for agility, I love doing that with my dog and I'm stressed, but it's not a good or a bad thing. It's just an activation of the nervous system, so to speak. So before I talk about the allostatic overload, for those who are not sure about what this is, I want to first really quickly say the allostatic state is defined by a chronic deviation of regulatory systems away from their normal state of operation, which then establishes a new set point. So the concept of an allostatic load or overload provides that the neuroendocrine, cardiovascular, neuroenergetic, and emotional responses become persistently activated. So the blood is just flowing, you have higher blood pressure, cognitive function, all of these things progress. A depressed mood can happen. And then this kind of thing, if it happens continuously over long periods of time, that is what is referred to as the allostatic load. So a dog is in a shelter, they're surrendered to the shelter, they're feeling distressed, maybe fearful, overwhelmed. Okay, that's fine. So now the dog their internal state has been moving away. Their allostatic state is defined by moving away chronic, so the deviation from the regulatory systems, moving away from the normal state of operation. But now the dog is there for days, weeks, months. So now you have this allostatic load, meaning it has been chronic, it has been prolonged. They're in that deviated state from their normal operations for a long period of time. So what happens then is it can result in permanently altered brain architecture, so function and structure, systemic pathophysiologies. And that's essentially what happens is the dog has a harder time coping with reduced uncertainty, right? That unpredictability, what's happening at the stress in the shelter, it basically changes their physiology. So that's the science piece that I'm just touching upon. You can always reach out to us if you want to learn more about that. And I'm sure in the show notes, there'll be various links to learn more about the resilience framework. And the article really dives into this. But essentially, what happens with allostatic load is that you end up with insufficient resilience. So your quality of life and well-being is basically dependent on the flexibility of the HPA axis. And there isn't a lot of flexibility if the body is in a state of chronic and prolonged stress. Okay, so what does this have to do with the framework? So Dr. Murphy and I, which Ferdie embraced, and everyone here at Behavior Vets has embraced, is we created a framework to really help people apply a methodology a framework to the work that they're doing. There are so many exercises, so many techniques, tools, processes, methodologies that can actually work within this framework. We wanted to create something that is broad and flexible so that you have a variety of tools to really work with the dog that's in front of you based on the environment that the dog is in. Because it's really about individualizing the program for the being in front of you. So we developed the Resilience Rainbow to help support professionals and guardians create behavior modification programs to build and maintain resilience. So many of the concepts and techniques created by brilliant behavior and training professionals in our field can be utilized in this framework. And the beauty of the framework is that it's not linear, nor is it restrictive. The domains are not discrete. All of them provide flexibility and individualization. So for example, so you can see my mouse, you could be working across several of these domains at any given time, even if you're maybe focusing mostly on safety and security for a particular individual. And we're going to get more into the specific domains shortly. So decompression. The term decompression has become popular in dog training and behavior circles as a definition that talks about reducing pressure or releasing pressure. We use this more in a behavioral context, referring to mental pressure, which could become inflated through environmental changes. But there's also neurobiological decompression, where the body's HPA activity decreases to its natural baseline. And so when we talk about decompression for the dogs in the shelter environment, we're not just thinking about what can I do to help the dog feel less overwhelmed, but we're also thinking about what can I do to support the body's HPA activity to lower it as much as possible. So while the dog is in the shelter, we're going to see we're not going to see the signs of chronic stress where we see like physical breakdowns such as skin issues, GI issues, or behavioral expressions like aggression, or they're bouncing off the walls, literally leaping in the air for hours. Like you're not going to see that level because you're working on constantly lowering the HPA activity through a variety of exercises. So some examples of passive decompression could look like sniffing, relaxing or cuddling. Like you can even do this with foster dogs. You could do this with dogs in the shelter if you have a real life room. You taking walks in fields, all kinds of, if they're co-housed, they can be cuddling together. All of those things are supportive for decompression. We also have examples of active decompression for some dogs: running, tugging, chewing, shredding. There's all kinds of ways to allow for active decompression. Some dogs really need to move.
Okay, I'm about to show you a video here. And Bobbie, you just pause for 1 second. I'm just going to set it up first. So here's actual footage of me working with Bruno, and this dog he's about 1 year old in this video. He had been at our shelter for I'd say about 4 weeks. This is one of my early training sessions with him, and what you'll see is he's not responsive to food and treats. He's not very responsive to me at all. So I'm here, and you're gonna see I'm like, how do I get this dog's attention? Okay. So you get to see kind of like how I'm thinking about this dog and what I see and what I eventually decide to use. And this is going to be an example of active decompression. So sometimes I know trainers are afraid to use play for decompression, because how does that work? Play can excite the dog. So this is going to be a good example of how you can use play with a dog that is just not responsive to food. And also this dog is, while he can play with certain other dogs, he wouldn't do well in a play group. And I know there's some questions about what do we do with dogs that don't do well in play group. He'd be a dog that, while he's social, if he was in a play group, he'd be the guy that makes everyone else too excited and making it too risky for everyone else. Okay. So go ahead, Bobbie. You can play.
All right. I'm going to keep it muted so you can talk over it.
Yes, exactly. So I'm trying to offer him treats, and the treats I'm using I'm like using meatballs and bacon and bark pouch treats. So really high value stuff. And he's not, motivated to work with me. But what I do notice, okay, I'm offering bark pouch, he's just running away from me. what I do notice is he does like toys. So we engage in some playing tug. And what I did here, and this was not planned, this was just something that I'm trying to think of, how do I get this dog's attention, is I started grabbing these two little toys and exchanging them and playing tug, 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 tug for a couple of seconds. And I kept doing this, different toys, just exchanging toys, playing tug. And then what this led to was really interesting. Okay, so I was playing this game for a few minutes, and this you're going to see soon is the first time I saw Bruno actually stop and take a breath, and you're going to see it very soon. He's rubbing his body into me. I take my hands off to see, like, are you enjoying that? And there it is. You're going to see him close his mouth, and he's just going to relax. There you go. So that was the first thing that gave me an idea. Okay, now he's starting to decompress. Now, what can I do with this new knowledge I have about Bruno and how I can reach out to him? Okay, so hold on to that. And so like I said, now I have him doing a little play date with another dog here. Okay, so one-on-one play dates with certain dogs with the right match. He was great. But play was really the way to get through to him. So I did some flirt pole work with him. And even while I'm doing this play, we are working on some regular training, sitting, working on some impulse control. Okay. And in here, now I'm taking that idea of using tug for active decompression. And I'm using two toys, exchanging. And again, I'm just tugging for a few seconds so he doesn't get overly excited. And I keep switching toys back and forth. Now I'm actually holding a toy lower to the ground. So he actually lies down now. Okay. And this is all stuff I'm just kind of playing around and trying to figure out how I can work with Bruno the best. So here we're establishing, you're going to see predictability and patterns can be helpful for decompression. So I keep exchanging these toys. I have a little mat there. So he sits, and then I drop the toy into those are snuffle mats. I meant to put treats in them, but he didn't really care for the treats. But after playing with him like this, now he's actually responding to food. So I had to go through all of that to get him to start to respond to food. Now, one of the biggest issues with Bruno was that when you take him out of the kennel, and pause for 1 second here, Bobbie, please. One of the reasons why he was hard to handle for a lot of our staff. In fact, very, very few people ever took him out, because as soon as you take him out of the kennel, he would jump up, grab the leash. If he couldn't grab the leash, he would grab you. And he's a pretty big, strong pit eater. So it wasn't fun for people to take him out. Now, what I have here, I have a nylon leash, I think. And then at the end of the leash, I have actually a choke chain that I'm using as a choke chain extension. Okay. So it's like another, I think it was like maybe another 16 inches of chain. So when I take him out here, and you're going to see how some of that exchanging toys with tug works well in this situation. So go ahead and hit play.
You transferred the skill.
Yep. So now I clip the leash on his collar, and I let him grab that part of the leash just to demonstrate this. Okay. I have a toy right there, and look at that, how easily he switches over to the toy. Now we can go out. And this was really the beginnings of finally getting him to be safe to take out. So that was his biggest issue, was jumping up and grabbing, which is a very, very common problem that you might find in shelters.
Thanks, Ferdie. So the next one we're going to talk about, the next domain is safety and security. So safety and security can look like a lot of different things. Like in this picture, the dog is in her little stroller because that's where she feels safe and secure. Safety and security is such an important part of building and maintaining resilience. And that is really hard in the shelter environment because So many dogs come in and feel incredibly insecure, maybe fearful. Maybe they've come from a difficult place, but now this is unfamiliar, or they've come from a home and now this is really unfamiliar and scary. So their behavior could be a result of feeling a lack of safety and security. And then there's things that we can do. So here are two examples of dogs that Ferdie has worked with.
Yes. So the dog on the left, that hound that's all covered in the blanket there, you're going to learn a little bit more about him later in this presentation. His name is Henry. He was very sensitive to noises, very fearful of noises. So what we did in this kennel is we put one of those travel crates in this kennel, and then we would cover it up with like thick, heavy blankets to, there's only so much you can do in the kennel. You can't really drown out all the noise or dampen out all the noise, but you just try your best. So that's what we try to do with him. And then in the other picture on the right, you see this is our real life room, and this is actually at the Humane Society of Westchester, which is in New Rochelle, New York. So our real life room, and you see what I have typically in all my training sessions with these shelter dogs is you'll see I have a blanket, and I'll have a snuffle mat, and I'll have various toys out. Okay. Now, especially when I have a fearful dog, a dog that may have some that stranger danger, I make sure that when the dog is on this blanket here, that nobody disturbs them, nobody touches them, that this is their safe space. And if they choose to interact with somebody, what I'll do is I'll actually bring them off of the blanket and bring them up to that person if they choose. But otherwise, if they choose to be on the blanket, this is their safe space. I don't let anyone touch them. This is our little bubble. And I can take this same setup, maybe with just a blanket and a snuffle mat. Maybe I'll take this out to a park where we can lay out and we can watch the world go by as well. And same thing, I do the same thing again. I don't let other people come up and touch the dog unless they actually choose to. And then I'll take them off the blanket to approach the people.
Okay. Completing the stress cycle is the next domain we're going to look at. Now, this is going to feel a little bit like decompression, but it's not. So completing the stress cycle, if you're thinking about the HPA axis, there is a cycle that the HPA axis goes through, right? There's the activation and then the deactivation where it goes up and then comes back down. And for decompression, you can bring the HPA axis down, but only when it comes all the way down to its true baseline, for that individual's baseline. That's what we're calling completing the stress cycle. And unfortunately, in the shelter environment, it is probably never going to happen. I think I've said in the past that when I worked in shelters, I've seen a couple of dogs that were deaf that truly were able to rest in the shelter and seemed almost undisturbed. If they were sleeping, they did not hear the commotion. They did not open their eyes and see another dog walk by. And it just, my experience with them was so interesting because it was very different from the other dogs that could hear everything in the shelter. So typically, shelter animals are not completing the stress cycle. If you think about your own lives as humans, if you're going through a period of time where there's like one thing after another, like a death in the family, God forbid, and then like a deadline at work, and you're not sleeping well because your brain is racing, and like, so it's just this accumulative effect, and you feel like you don't have time to really take care of yourself. That could be a situation where you're not completing this stress cycle. And so it isn't always possible, unfortunately. And for some individuals, especially depending on how high the HPA axis has been elevated and for how long it's been at that level, it can take days or weeks to come down to baseline. And the very cool thing is, once the body is consistently completing that stress cycle, you can actually move the baseline lower. So a lot of these shelter dogs, when they've had a couple of months in the home, post-adoption, their baseline starts to lower and lower and lower. My colleague, Dr. Murphy, when she did a lot of work with her rescue Rottweiler and had come a really long way, had come from a history of trauma, and she felt like, wow, my dog has really shown incredible resilience. And then they bought a farm last year and they live on 10 acres. And she saw her dog, who she believed had really had like the baseline had moved. This was the new baseline. She saw it lower even more because now they're living on 10 acres. Lucky dog. And it can be the same for humans. So, Ferdie, do you want to
Okay.
introduce a friend here?
Yeah, so some dogs in the shelter, as many of you know and see, you can probably identify those dogs that they don't truly ever really get to the baseline. But this is Henry post-adoption, and this is the first time I actually saw him completing his stress cycle. This is what it looks like.
Yeah, so I'm not going to play the sound because
Yeah, so the owner's coming and she's saying, "Do you want to go for a walk? You want to go for a walk?" Okay. So you see some lip licks there, but I don't think that's negative stress. I think that's excitement stress. So see him rolling on his back, stretching out, waving his head back and forth. He got that open, relaxed mouth. He is a
And you never did
happy
that at the
boy.
shelter, right? You never like this
Never
normal.
saw this at the shelter. Okay.
Yeah.
So finally, you see this different side of him when he finally was able to truly relax. Okay. Now, another way that you can help dogs decompress and or complete their stress cycle are play groups. So play groups are very effective. It can help reduce stress for dogs who choose to participate. It also, for some of those dogs that aren't so comfortable around people, but are a lot more social around dogs. So I'm thinking about some of these puppy mill and hoarding cases. Okay, that having another dog there helps encourage social learning so that they can have positive experiences with humans and in different environments. And it's also obviously a form of enrichment for some dogs.
All right, the next domain we're going to talk about is mental and physical well-being. Here we go. So this is really the cornerstone of anything when you're working behavior or you're supporting an animal. If they are not physically well, if they are not mentally well, all the training in the world is not going to help. And so when you're thinking about your shelter dogs, you're thinking about a lot of times there's gastrointestinal issues. Their sleep is impacted, right? They're not able to sleep during shelter hours, not really. It may be not even at night, as dark as it gets. Sometimes, you do have to have some kind of lights on, or the fact that it's just not as quiet. A lot of dogs come in with skin issues because of the chronic stress that they're feeling. Perhaps they're coming from situations where they're malnourished. Perhaps there was a history of neglect or abuse. A lot of dogs experience pain that goes undiagnosed because they're not showing obvious signs of being in pain. This just happened to my dog. He ended up with a soft tissue injury in his toe. But for most of the day, I didn't realize he had a problem, except I just noticed that, oh, he seems a bit more subdued. And then it wasn't until we went for a walk did I see that, oh, he's holding up his paw. But when I was just working in my office, I noticed that he was just a bit more subdued. But that's hard to see when you're taking care of so many shelter dogs and they're not truly who they would be in a home because of the stress of the environment. So considering taking on their mental and physical well-being is really important. And then in a lot of cases, and then this example that Ferdie's going to go into, behavior medication is very supportive for their mental health so that you can make some progress in the behavior work that you're doing or just supporting the dog while they're in the shelter awaiting adoption.
Okay, I'm going to share more about Henry here. I love sharing this story because this is one of those clear aha moments I had working in a shelter. So it's a very special story for me. Now, when Henry was about 7-year-old hound that was found in Kentucky. He just lived outside. He was tied up to a tree the whole time. It was really, we don't know much about him other than that. Now, when he came to our shelter, you can hit play now, Bobbie, please.
Mhm.
All he would do when you took him out was he would stand at the door or the gate. So you took him out to the pen, he'd just stand there and he'd do nothing, totally unresponsive. You could be in the quietest room in our shelter and he would just stand at the door. Whenever you took him out, he would just turn around and pull and try to go back to his kennel. The only place he wanted to be was in his kennel, but specifically in the outdoor part of his kennel. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more. So that's what he looked like for, I would say about 2 months. I'll say in quotes, I tried everything and I just couldn't get through to him. So, feeling very frustrated. Okay, you can go to the next video, Bobbie.
Okay.
This is it, right? Yeah,
that
this is
was,
part
yeah.
2. Yes. Go ahead
And
and
that
play.
and the video that you saw before was before the medication.
Before medication, yep. And I couldn't tell what was going on, okay, until finally, oh, sorry, pause right here, Bobbie, sorry.
Oh, sorry, yep.
So our kennels, like many of these shelter kennels, we have an indoor part and then they have a little trap door to go outdoor, okay? The outdoor part of our kennels faces Interstate 95. Which is just kind of down the hill from where we are. So you hear the noise of the traffic, just cars going by all day long, okay? So this is about 2 months in, and I just couldn't get through to Henry. Couldn't figure out what to do with him. He was not responsive to anything. So I just sat in this kennel with him on the outside part of the kennel. And then this is where I figured it out. This is where every time we heard any kind of bang come from the inside of the kennel, like a door closing, a gate closing, a metal bowl hitting the floor, I saw him flinch. Okay. And I didn't see this when I took him out of the kennel because he was so shut down when we took him out of the kennel. He didn't even startle and flinch when he heard loud noises. So we didn't see that response until I was actually in his kennel sitting with him. So this actually goes back to safety and security. The only place he felt safe was the outdoor part of his kennel. Maybe it's because he always lived outdoors in his life. And maybe it's because the constant sound of the cars on Interstate 95 helped drown out the noise from inside the kennel. But this was finally where I'm like, oh, now I see you. Okay. So this is where you can start playing now. We started him on the medications. He started on fluoxetine. I asked other people to sit out there and have a picnic with him in his kennel. We started playing some games. He started being playful. I took a blanket and we just wrapped him in a blanket, rubbed him up, and then let him come back to us and see if he enjoyed that. So this was the beginnings of bonding with him, of making a connection with him, okay? And having that social support is so, so important here. And here he is in his little,
Cocoon.
Cocoon, yeah, good word for that. Okay. We did some enrichment where he can make noise and he has some agency, looking, rummaging through some boxes with newspaper, making noise on his own. And the training that we did was just basically working on relax on a mat. And we would do this in as many different environments as possible. So here we are doing a little relaxation exercise. He's going to come over to the mat, relax here.
And all of the training that Ferdie did, it wasn't possible before the medication because he was so shut down.
Yes. So it was a medication, finally bonding with him by sitting with him in his kennel, and then just working this little exercise. Okay.
Thank you. So the next domain is predictability. This is one of my favorite domains. As a practitioner, I will say that this is really difficult to provide in the shelter environment, but we can do as much as possible. So predictability is really about looking at, it's not necessarily routines, it's more about patterns and rituals. Ferdie already mentioned patterns before, in the way that you interact with the way he was working with Bruno with the toys. He put a toy on this side, Bruno went to his mat, he put the toy on this side, and it was kind of, he just shaped him to start doing that. You can do similar things with food. So here are 3 exercises that I'm going to talk about that Leslie McDevitt, if you guys are not familiar with her work, she wrote a book called Control Unleashed. Her second edition is subtitled From Reactive to Relaxed. I think that's the more updated version. She also has a Facebook page called Friends of Controlled Unleashed. These pattern games are applicable to so many things. And yes, you can use these games to help the dog feel more at ease with potential triggers in the environment. You can also use these games to promote building resilience by playing the games just to play the games. You don't even have to do them around potential triggers. So I'm going to play the first one. This is the up and down game. Very simple. All you do is you place a treat on the ground, the dog eats it, they look up at you, they get another one. You don't have to wait for them to look right in your eyes. They just have to look up. Now, and you don't do anything. You don't cue them. You don't do anything. There you go. If you want to learn more about these games, definitely get Leslie's book. So in there, the dog is looking at something. There's a guy walking up. And he's allowed to look, process what's happening in the environment, take your time, come back to me whenever you're ready. Okay. This next one is called the 1, 2, 3 game. So this is a student of mine, a client of mine, who does dog sport. And she's just giving her dog the 1, 2, 3 count as they're walking past a bunch of people. And he loves people, but she wants him to be more responsive to him. So imagine, like, teaching a dog to leash walk. Imagine working a dog through difficult situations to teach him the 1, 2, 3 game. I don't advise using this game to walk through the kennel. I'm a big fan of, like, let's just get out of the kennel as quickly as we can. I don't want to ask you to control yourself. There's just too much going on. But just to do the game, once you've had the dog out in the world and he's decompressed a bit from leaving the kennel, you can play the game just to practice a pattern. Brains look for patterns. So sorry, I want to rewind this real quick. You're going to see that she's actually, you don't hear it, but she's saying 1, 2, 3, she's giving a treat. 1, 2, 3, she's giving a treat. And it doesn't have to look perfect. You just do the count and you give the treat. So brains look for patterns. It's about being efficient and effective. And so if we can provide patterns in as many ways as possible for the dog, that will actually help their brainwave activity. So this is another game. I love this game. It's the Super Bowls game because it has visual targets. This is a dog I worked with in New York City who had a history of aggression. He had bitten, actually grabbed someone's pant leg. That was the extent of the bite, but he was muzzled. So the targets really helped him, those visual targets. When the dog looks up at him, it doesn't have to be direct eye contact. Dad says, yes, move to the next plate. We did this. He's wearing a mask because this was in 2021. And he can take his time. He needs a little help because the muzzle knocked it off the plate there. But as soon as he re-engages with Dad, so he says yes, and we move to the next plate. And there, he puts it on the plate, even though the dog's looking elsewhere. It's totally fine. He's helping his little dog because this plate's sliding everywhere. You can use bowls, you can use targets, all kinds of things for the Super Bowl game. So these are the 3 games that are my cornerstone go-to pattern games when I want to provide some kind of predictability. Now, in the examples of these videos, the dogs are out in the world. These are not shelter dogs, and they have different issues that we're working through. The first video here, this dog had some fear of being in New York City. This dog would leave his mama, his handler, and go visit the people. And so this is a bit of self-control work. And then this dog had a history of aggression, and we wanted him to feel more at ease and not so hypervigilant in the environment. And I had them practice these games outside of these triggering situations. One, to sort of neutralize it. We don't only want to do the games when they're hard, but two, just practicing the games a few times a week for just the sake of the game can help change brainwave activity because the brain wants patterns. Oops, it's playing it again. We'll go to the next slide. Okay, I set it up for you, Ferdie. I'll wait till you're ready.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yes, so this is at a catch workshop at the St. Hubert's Animal Welfare Center in Madison, New Jersey. This is our week-long workshops working with shelter dogs. It's a great opportunity to get hands-on work with shelter dogs and get coaching from people like Bobbie and I. So this is the first day. You can imagine these are student trainers. They have no connection with these shelter dogs. And now we're going to do the 1, 2, 3 game in this room. You can go ahead and hit play. And we are working on 1, 2, 3, going back and forth. And this was a great way of getting these shelter dogs to connect with their new handlers. Something easy, it's predictable, it's repeatable. And especially, you got one of these students working with a husky. I think anybody who's ever worked with a husky in the shelter knows how hard it can be to get their attention. There we go.
I remember this guy.
Yes. So they're just doing that 1, 2, 3, just an easy, simple exercise that you can teach lots of other people, and you don't need extra training skills.
Thank you. So the next domain we're going to talk about, social support. This is a great one for the shelter. So social support involves being present and available without the need of force of control. This might look like sitting on the floor with your puppy so they can climb into your lap while watching kids play at a park at a distance. It might look like having a calm, confident dog accompany a fearful dog on a walk. It could also look like a volunteer sitting unobtrusively in a kennel while a dog is adjusting to the activity noise of their new shelter environment. This is what Ferdie did with Henry when he sat in the back of the kennel outside with him and just got to know what he was like, in the space that Henry felt the most comfortable. So here in this video, I'm going to play this video. This is a dog that had a history of aggression that was a client of mine, but I do this with shelter. I've done this with shelter dogs too, and I know Ferdie does this too, and we call this world watching. You're just sitting at a distance. It's desensitization. That's what it is. And you can see the people and the dogs walking in the background. You're not doing any work with the dog. You're just sitting there with the dog, supporting them, but you're sitting far enough away that they can process whatever they need to process in the environment without you actively training and going in it. So they're learning how to deal with what's going on around them without this spike in arousal. And for shelter dogs, that is so important. Doing nothing is so important sometimes because a lot of these dogs, feeding time is really stimulating. Anytime someone comes to their kennel, it's really stimulating. There's these constant spikes in their arousal. They don't really get time because of lack of space, lack of resources, lack of time to do something like this. So if volunteers can take a dog on a field trip and go to a park and just sit and just watch the world, that is so good for the dogs in terms of their neurobiology. So their physiology starts to settle a bit and give them what they need before they go back into the kennel. And also it gives them the opportunity to just process what's happening around them in the environment, which helps them for when they get adopted to sort of see these things and experience these things. Walks are great. And at some point, especially if a volunteer can make the time for it, it's just for 10 minutes, sit on a park bench and just see the world go by. Or if volunteers are allowed to take dogs off campus, sit in the car, in the crate, or just sit in the car, from the car, watch the world go by, 10, 15 minutes. And that's all you really need to do.
Hey, Bobbie, we're running short on time. Let's skip to the agency and we'll wrap it up there. Okay.
Okay. Agency. So agency is the feeling of having control or of their actions or consequences. Agency is very difficult to do in the kennel for lots of a shelter for lots of reasons. They have limited time that they're out of their kennel. They're in these small spaces. When they go out, they're usually on leash. In some shelters, they don't even have the resources to allow the dogs to go out beyond the kennel. Maybe they're just going in and out of their kennel space. So, do you want to talk a little bit about Chewy here?
Sure, I think this will be a very last one. Just go through this quickly. So Chewy, again, we're working on he's just relaxing, watching the world. If he didn't want to move and he just wanted to lay there, I would just let him be. Okay. Then we did enrichment in his kennel so he can work on uh, playing the way he wants to, chew on things, rip things apart, do that, whatever he wants to do. And then we took lots of nature walks, take him on field trips and let him go out and explore, let him choose and sniff everything that let him feel like a dog, basically, even roll in poop if he wants to. Okay. We can always give him a bath. It's fine. We're gonna just let them be dogs and have them have some agency. Okay, I think we're gonna have to take questions now.
Yep.
Thank you for so much. This has been really, really, really interesting. And yeah, let's jump in. The first question is a super quick one and is about Bruno Ferdie. Question is, had you spent time with him before that first video?
I had only taken him out for a couple of walks, and now I only work 1 day a week at the shelter, so I only work there on Fridays because my full-time job is with behavior vets. So really, I had very limited interaction with Bruno, other than I was going to take him out for a walk because nobody else felt safe taking him out of the kennel. So that was it, and I hadn't really done much training until you saw that video. That was my very first training session with him.
Okay, thank you.
Can I actually just show people how to contact us real quick, like that?
Yes, that is perfect.
Okay. And then I can stop screen sharing. So you guys can find us in all these different ways. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right, thank you for that, Bobbie. Next question is, how do you balance active decompression with low arousal enrichment activities?
Oh gosh, I'll jump into that. Well, actually, it's exactly what Ferdie did with the Bruno session. Sometimes
Yeah,
it's about experimentation. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Ferdie? Like, there's
sure,
no wrong
sure.
or right.
Yeah, I guess I come with this with a ethological perspective, and yeah, I'm also under like I used to work at the zoo, so I try to think of the dog as a canine, not like a furry human. So I think of that predator sequence of go out, search, grab, and dissect and rip apart and dissect and then ingest. So with Bruno, okay, you may take him out. Maybe I take him out for a walk first, or we go for a play session. All right, and you're playing fetch. What's fetch? It's chasing something. So you're chasing prey. You're playing tug with him. What's tug? It's sort of holding prey and ripping it apart. Okay, so you're practicing all these kind of behaviors that are needed for predation. So once we kind of do that play in the tug, you saw how he was starting to get more responsive to me. Okay. Then after that, then I could see like, okay, now you're kind of starting to respond to treats and food. And that's a little easier to do passive decompression, like working on, let's lie on the mat here. I will sprinkle some treats here. And why don't we just chill out and do some world watching? So those are ways I might do a lot of the how I may switch from active to passive decompression.
Great, thank you. That was a wonderful answer. So next question, can you share more on defining the baseline and ending the stress cycle? Is it the normal unstressed state?
Yeah, so the baseline we're talking about is the HPA axis. So think of the nervous system essentially. So the nervous system is activated. Have you ever felt like super stressed that you're almost like tingly sometimes, like you feel like you're vibrating because you're dealing with an immense amount of stress? Maybe you're feeling a lot of emotions with that immense amount of stress. So what we're looking to do is that feeling that you experience when that's no longer happening. It's almost like your whole body exhales. It's almost like I'm trying to think of an example. Being on vacation, for 2 weeks on a beach, if that's ever possible. You can that experience before you go back to work is, like where your body is truly about completing the stress cycle. You can see it in your dog sometimes, like dogs that have been living in a home for a long time and they feel really supported and you're truly meeting all of their needs. Like I have 5 dogs sitting here all around me, like laying down on the rug in dog beds, like sprawled out, truly looking at ease. And that's what we're looking at when we're talking about the baseline or the HPA axis. And when you're thinking about there's a really great book that I want to share with you guys to help you understand more about completing the stress cycle. It's called Burnout: Completing the Stress Cycle, and it is by Emily and Amy Nagowski. They wrote this book. I think it came out in late 2019 or early 2020. And I read it at the start of the pandemic. And I just started to apply a lot of those things thank you for putting that in there, Amber. I started to apply a lot of that to my own life. And when I'm really stressed, I just get on my Peloton bike and I'll ride for 20 minutes. Or some people will play music. My husband plays guitar when he's stressed, art, going for a run, going for a walk in nature. All of these things are applicable.
Great. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. We have a ton more questions, but we are unfortunately out of time. So any additional questions, Bobbie and Ferdie will be answering those on Maddie's Pet Forum. Bobbie and Ferdie, thank you so very much for sharing your work with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.